Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Robert Jensen. He's an author and a professor of journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. Hi, Bob.
Hello, Sonali.
Well, rebels claiming allegiance to the Islamic State group attacked Libya's most luxurious hotel earlier today. The Corinthia Hotel in the capital Tripoli attracts foreign diplomats and tourists. 5 people were killed as the standoff came to a close. The attack came in the midst of ongoing battles between two factions vying for political power in Libya, more than 3 years after a US-Nato operation ousted longtime dictator Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. Meanwhile, ISIS forces in the Kurdish border town of Kobani in Syria have apparently been driven out after many months of battles. Kurdish Peshmerga forces backed by US air power have declared victory, saying they now control 90% of Kobani's territory. Well, Bob, these are two very different stories, but is there a lesson here on the role of the US military, which plunged Libya into chaos but seems to have played a more positive role in Kobani?
I wouldn't draw too many direct lessons from these two cases. I think the larger lesson, which we need to remind ourselves of over and over again, is to think of the Middle East, North Africa, that area, what we sometimes call the Muslim world, as a political ecosystem, and recognize that as in a real ecosystem, one change affects other places. You can't make solutions work, sort of generically. So I think we should start talking about, things like a regional peace conference. The United States, I think, has to openly acknowledge its failures of the past, which it's never done. There are some things that are hard to imagine being done politically in the United States, but which would really change the conditions on the ground and make a more holistic approach possible. So any success militarily that beats back forces that are truly a threat is to be, admired in some sense, but it's not the long-term solution.
Right. A federal jury in Virginia yesterday found former CIA official Jeffrey Sterling guilty of 9 charges relating to the Espionage Act. The case revolved around the leaked details of an ill-conceived CIA operation called Project Merlin to plant flawed nuclear plans in the hands of Iranian authorities. Mr. Sterling, who is African-American, was relieved of duty after he alleged racial discrimination, so prosecutors claimed he was a disgruntled former employee who leaked details of the plan as revenge. The New York Times' James Risen had been pressured for years to testify against Sterling based on the assumption that he was Risen's source. After much public pressure, the Justice Department decided against forcing Risen's testimony. According to the Times, the DOJ, quote, had no direct proof that Mr. Sterling, who managed the Iranian operation, provided the information to Mr. Risen, but prosecutors stitched together a strong circumstantial case, end of quote. Observers called the guilty verdict, quote, a new low in the war in whistleblowers and government hypocrisy. Well, Bob, how do you respond to this verdict?
Well, I can't comment on this because of national security concerns. Okay, there are two things that are really depressing about this case. One is, I wasn't in the courtroom, but if you read the accounts, we're calling this a circumstantial case, but it's a really circumstantial case. It's a really weak case. And the fact that a jury convicted reminds us that when the government says national security, they often can prevail. The other depressing aspect of this, of course, is that the Obama administration, many of us didn't have high expectations of Obama, but we thought at least on some of these more egregious things, he would roll back the worst of previous presidential positions on this. And in this case, of course, it's the opposite. It's a reminder when it comes to this kind of use of executive authority to cover up the failures of the intelligence community, the Defense Department, whatever it might be, that this administration is no different, and as someone pointed out, even worse than some previous ones.
And finally, despite having a majority in both houses of Congress, the Republican Party has failed in its attempt to pass a veto-proof bill approving the Keystone XL pipeline project. After the House swiftly passed such a bill, the Senate yesterday was only able to muster 53 votes, 8 shy of a supermajority. Senate Democrats had denounced Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's move to cut off debate on the bill before the vote. President Obama has vowed to veto the measure after years of public pressure against the pipeline by environmental activists who see it as a major threat to global warming. The vote comes as a record-breaking blizzard hits New York City, Boston, and other East Coast areas. Such extreme weather is, of course, consistent with scientific predictions of climate change. So, Bob, is Keystone dead? Can climate justice activists claim victory on this one issue?
Well, if it's a victory, it's a very small one. I think there's a debate within the environmental community about whether the opposition to the pipeline is merely symbolic or will really have a material effect on how much of that tar sand oil gets pumped. But I think it's wrong to overestimate the importance of this. The Obama administration has not been strong on this question in the first place. It's all of the above so-called strategy of encouraging the exploitation of more fossil fuels is not a hopeful sign. And I think in the end, this is really more of a symbolic question than anything. The price of oil is going to have a lot of effect on this. Not much reason to be cheering at this point.
Bob Jensen, always a pleasure to have you on. We'll talk to you again next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Anal.
Robert Jensen is an author and a professor of journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. This is Uprising. We'll be right back.